I found out I was going to become a mother 5 days before I was due to box. It felt like I had a huge responsibility of keeping this family unit together. It's normal and natural to want to have your family together. And I think we also have to question what is that signaling in terms of to your children. And it wasn't until I was able to talk to other women about their own experiences that I understood, oh, this is not healthy, this is not okay. I feel emotional about it because I understand what it takes. Welcome to the Fight Forward podcast. I'm your host, Lesley Sackey, former GB boxer and gold medalist. The Fight Forward podcast for me was really just about sharing honest, intimate stories around people's own individual challenges and experiences as we move through the messiness of life, especially for women who have felt disempowered, who have felt like things are not possible, and who wanted to see that they can be inspired and that they don't have to stay in this survival state. There is options, there is growth, there is movement. And on the other side of something challenging is an opportunity to thrive. I feel very privileged to have had these conversations with very different, very interesting, very inspiring women. I was quite an independent child. I grew up with two boys, two brothers. And so movement for me looked like them watching wrestling on the TV and then trying out the moves on me afterwards. Sports wasn't really something that I wanted to do or that I was interested in, but I was creative. I always had little projects. I liked to collect things. And I realized I was quite entrepreneurial and I was old before my time. I definitely had a sense of feeling like I had an emotional intelligence that I don't think was fully recognized because I was a child. And often in those times, I felt like children are seen or not heard. So I think my experience was very much of independence and being left to my own devices to create and cultivate my own universe. At the time, I look back and I feel like I always wanted to grow up with sisters. And now, because of the environments I've been in, I feel really grateful for having grown up with boys. Growing up in a household where there are boys kind of gives you a little bit of an edge when you're perhaps walking into a boxing gym and there's no other females. It doesn't feel so scary. I got into boxing late. It wasn't until my early 20s. And if you look at the journey of a lot of athletes, often they've been groomed from an early age. That was not my journey. I went as an alternative to the gym, and I think I was encouraged and supported, and I think there was a natural talent there as well. So this conversation around nature and nurture, it was a combination of both. So I had a natural ability, but if it wasn't for the environment that pushed that out of me, perhaps I wouldn't have been the boxer I am today. I had my first session. It was a keep fit class. I was sweating loads. I was talking to other people and they were telling me they'd been going 5 times a week. And I was like, who does that? Who trains that amount of time? Who moves like that? But there is something in boxing that just, I can only describe. You catch a bug. I started to see results. I started to feel good. I like the idea that you're doing something different every time. I felt like I got bored easily. And so what boxing offered me was variation. It gave me confidence. And on top of that, the environment I was in, although it was very, I would say it felt very tough, there was something loving and nurturing about it. And I formed a relationship with my coach, which is classic $1 million baby style, where you have a father-like figure who then takes this young boxer under their wing, and then the rest is history. And that's pretty much how it went for me. His name was Mr. A, and he was a legend. He was a very prominent figure in the boxing community, but he was also a father figure to me. And he provided nurturing at a time when I didn't even realize I needed it. I feel like having somebody like Mr. A as a male figure show up for me was important to me because I'd been in a household where I was raised by an amazing, fiercely independent mother who raised all 3 of us solo. So my dad was present in the peripherals, but the main caregiver was my mum. And so what comes with being a solo parent is that you're having to do the role of two people, essentially. If I look back, there are some things that I could have benefited from that I didn't get from having a two-parent dynamic. And one of those things, I think, is being seen. And so it felt quite new. And that's what I got from Mr. A. He minimized negative thoughts of, I can't do this today. And he's like, what are you talking about? Don't be so ridiculous. He was also an advocate for me. And I think it's important when we're talking about, how women show up in the world or in spaces where there aren't many women. I think it's important. There's not a separation of male and female. I think it's about allyship. And Mr. A was my ally in an environment that felt quite harsh. And so that's what it gave me. It gave me like someone has my back. My journey into boxing was just give it a try. I was always very nonchalant about it. Oh, why don't you have a fight? Is what Mr. A said to me. And I was like, okay. And I remember about the first fight, that what I remember is that I've never been so tired in my life and my shorts were too tight. They're the two main things. And I lost, actually. But I was so excited to be there. I had people cheering for me. I had this huge rush and adrenaline and excitement. And even though the outcome didn't go my way, I felt like something big had been achieved. And so there was no pressure. It wasn't until actually I started achieving and doing better in boxing when I started to experience the pressure. But the initial early days were freeing, to be honest. I had nothing to lose. So every time I was asked to box, I'd say, yeah, why not? Let's see. And actually in that first fight I lost, I learned a lot of things that made me go on to be very successful in boxing afterwards. So I learned about diet. I learned about mindset. I learned about wearing clothes that fit. I learned about confidence in terms of when I step into the ring, how do I want to show up? And I think that was a tool that I started to develop the more I experienced boxing. There came a point where I had to choose. I was waiting for the boxing to be announced in the 2012 Olympics, the female Olympics. At this point, I was getting noticed. I'd won the British Championships. I was also selected to box for Team GB. And at this point, I was conflicted because I loved what I was doing in music, but suddenly I'd had this newfound love in boxing. And I felt like I was good at it and that I could do well at it. So I made a choice. I said to myself, I'm going to give myself a year. I'm going to focus on all things boxing. I'm going to drive and channel all my energy into making this a reality and wait for the Olympics to be announced. So I made a choice, and it was when I'd won the European Championships. I got a gold medal. I was the first boxer to win a gold medal on first entry at that tournament. And that was a pivotal moment for me because then I started to realize that I'm good at what I am doing. And up until that point, even though I was boxing, I didn't always think I should be there. My first thought, in fact, the week before I turned up to the European tournament, I knew that I was going to be boxing girls who'd had 60, 70, 100 fights. And at this point, I was on my 6th fight. So my idea was just to turn up and not embarrass myself. That was my main objective, was to go to this tournament and at least not stand out so that I didn't look like I shouldn't be boxing there or that I didn't belong. So when I got there, the first person I boxed was a former champion and I managed to beat her. It was really close, actually. They had to count back. So they had to make a decision, look back at the footage and then decide who the winner was. And I got it. And so by doing that, I was on to the next stage, which meant I got a bronze medal. So in my head, I was like, great, okay, I've got a bronze. I've done really well. And I rang the coach and said, Mr. A, I've won. I've got this bronze medal. I've done really well. And he swore at me. He was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Go out there and get silver. So I was like, oh, right. Okay, go out and get silver. So my mindset started to shift. My head's in the game. I'm in the tournament. Let me go out and get silver. I got my first knockdown, this Italian boxer, very experienced boxer. I knocked her down and I got silver. And I was so excited. And I rang him again and said, Mr. A, I've got silver. Like in my head, I was like, I've done enough now. This is enough to secure, not just respectable, but great. And again, he swore at me again with love. and said, silver's great, but you go and get fucking gold. Like, go and get gold. And I was like, oh. And that night I went to bed. I wasn't well, actually. This is the night before the tournament. And my thoughts were racing, and it was like, what does it look like? You know, what if you lose? How's that going to be? And I actually had this book someone had given me called The Secret. And I read a few pages of it and then I put it down. But the concept around it was visualization. So in terms of actually seeing what you want to happen. So that night I was fluey, like I was aching. I had the covers over my head. I had the sweats. And at this point I was like, oh my God, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to box tomorrow. But I just kept focusing on this gold circle in my head. And I kept focusing on what it would feel like in terms of my hand being raised. And at this point as well, Mr. A said, if you get to the final, we're all coming up to see you. So he organized the coach for my local All-Stars boxing club to come up and drive up to Liverpool. So when I was there in the tournament, I was boxing this French girl. And I had all these people from London supporting me. I had all these boxers and other people who were out of the tournament but showing up and supporting everyone else. I had my teammates. I had Natasha Jonas, Nicola Adams. But ultimately, it's only yourself in that space. So once you step into the ring, it's just you and the other person. But actually, I realized my toughest opponent is myself. So all I need to do is step into the ring with the mindset that I'm already a champion. And then the rest, it moves through me. And it was one of the most enjoyable boxing fights I've had. It felt like an out-of-body experience. It felt like everything was aligned and working together, and I was just in my glory. Just everything I trained for, everything just clicked, and it was such a beautiful feeling and such a really powerful reminder of what I'm capable of. And so I think that's what boxing continues to give me. So that was the shift, having to go through something difficult. It was having to manage my own negative thoughts. It was having the support of others, going through that whole process where I felt like I had earned the right to be there. And from that, I guess that gave me tools to use that outside in my day-to-day life of always trying to show up and knowing that I have a right to be in any space and that I'm powerful and purposeful and that means something. So I found out I was going to become a mother 5 days before I was due to box. Olympics hadn't happened for me. I was in a space where there were 3 weight categories and I'd made it to the first ever female Olympic selection and I didn't fit in between the weights. So what was a newly acquired dream quickly evaporated. And so I think at that point as well, my heart wasn't in it, if I'm really honest. I was getting a little bit older and was thinking about having children as well. So this last fight, it wasn't a tournament or anything. It was just a boxing fight just to find out, you know, how I felt about boxing, if I wanted to keep going. And I was terrible. I was very distracted and tired. And, you know, sometimes when it comes to sparring and tournaments, you have your worst spar is your final spar and then you end up showing up and performing on the day. That happened to me for the European tournament. This felt a little bit different. And so I kind of put 2 and 2 together and I went home and I'd done some tests. I say some, I'd done 7. I'd done seven pregnancy tests. And it started off with just the lines. And then I wanted to buy the ones that said not pregnant or pregnant. I needed to clarity. So after my 7 tests, I realized I was pregnant, and it was what I like to say, a nice surprise. But when I went to Mr. A, I felt nervous because for many reasons. I guess he's someone important to me. I also feel like with boxing, because you're trained by a team of people, you don't want to let people down. So especially when they're investing their time and energy into you. So I was a little nervous and I started crying. And he guessed it instantly. He was like, oh, you're pregnant. And I was like, yes, I'm pregnant. And he was really sweet. And that was it. He gave me a hug and was like, okay. But what was crazy was that I thought about boxing. In my head, I was like, oh, maybe I'll make sure I won't take body shots. That's how, it sounds crazy now when I look back, but that's how boxing had me, in the sense of it was super important to me to complete and to show up. And so I really, for a moment, thought about it. And then that's what I think motherhood is you're essentially preparing to put somebody else first. And so that was the beginning of that journey for me. So actually saying no to boxing, not fighting, so that I could now begin this journey of motherhood, which is 9 months of preparation and acceptance of learning that this life is no longer just about you. This body is no longer just about you. And so that's where the journey began. And it was a powerful one in terms of me letting go of one thing and learning how to embrace another. And I felt like a huge sense of responsibility that I didn't just want to be a parent. I wanted to be somebody who raised powerful, inspired humans. And also I felt like boxing is a really hard thing to walk away from. I remember Mr. A saying the hardest thing to walk away from is boxing. And I understand that now, because I felt like if somehow I was pregnant, then it would be very clear, boxing no more. Because even though my heart wasn't in it, it's very hard. You still think, oh, maybe I could try, or maybe I should box for Ghana, or maybe I should try a different route. So it was very hard to just say no and be like, that's it. So it was kind of open-ended for me still. And I felt like being a mother ended that until I saw amazing mothers training and having babies and then getting back in the ring. I was actually really inspired by that. And I think if my setup was a little bit different in terms of my partner and having that support, I think I would have definitely explored it. 3 months into my pregnancy, I'd created this project that I was really excited about because I'm half Ghanaian and half Irish. So both of these two fighting spirits, cultures, heritage. And I wanted to create a documentary around female boxing in Ghana. I'd spent some time there previously, and I'd seen that the women there have this natural raw strength. And because boxing and football are huge sports in Ghana, I felt like there's an opportunity here for women to qualify in the Olympics, and in doing so, create more awareness and more funding for the sports and access for the women and actually for the men in boxing in Ghana. So the documentary was based on the exploration of that. So at this time, I was 3 months pregnant and going to Ghana to film that documentary. And it was a mixture of things again, because this was planned before, but now I was pregnant. So the way I could show up was not in the way that I'd previously planned. And again, it was just teaching me to prioritize, was that the needs of this growing child come before my own. And that was also part of the journey as well. So my journey that led me to Fight Forward was after leaving an abusive relationship. And I was 8 years out of it, but it was 8 years of chaos. It was 8 years of upset, inconsistency, a lot of instability in terms of how my life as a solo mother would look like moving forwards. And at this point, I had 3 girls. And so I felt like I was maintaining. So I was working and I had my business and I was training people and I was training myself, moving in the way that I normally would, sometimes running, sometimes a little bit of boxing. But definitely there was a lot of upheaval and struggle. And I felt 2 years ago, it was the culmination of things coming to the end. And I felt low. I felt disempowered. I felt like everything was just about survival and just getting through. And I didn't want to feel like that anymore. So I wanted to do things that made me feel strong. I wanted to feel like I had something to work towards. I wanted to shift old energy, old thought patterns. I thought, what makes me feel good? What makes me feel strong? And boxing was it. And so at this point, it's been 10 years since I was out of the ring. I had a hip operation, so I had a total hip replacement. I had recently had an operation on my foot, so I had a pin in my foot. So physically, I'm healthy, like I'm still training, but there were some things that I felt stagnant. I felt I wanted to move some things. And so without knowing how, but I knew the why, I was like, I'm going to box. I'm turning 40 this year, and it's my last opportunity. In amateur boxing, you can box up until your 41st birthday. I decided at Christmas I'm going to have one last fight, and I turned 40 in May. So I'm going to have a fight at All Stars, the place where I had my first boxing match when my shorts were too tight and everybody was there cheering me on. It felt full circle that I was going to complete. I decided I'm going to train for this fight. I don't know how, but I'm going to do this. So I went to All Stars and I said, when is your home show? I want to be a part of it. And they said, sure, no problem. They've always been very supportive of my journey. And so I started training, and it was humbling. I was training 5-6 times a week at the peak of my career. I thought I could do that the same. I thought I knew about diet. This is 10 years later. I've had 3 babies. Everything's changed. It was humbling because I had to really adjust my training. I had to adjust my nutrition, and I had to adjust my ego, because when you go back into the boxing gym and it feels like you're starting from ground zero. And so I'm boxing with novices who were basically punching me around the ring. I came home, the first sparring session I came home with a black eye, and my mum was like, are you sure you want to do this? She's like, you never used to get black eyes. And so, yeah, I was like, thanks, Mum. And yes, I'm going to do this. So the process really was a 12-week process, a training program. And by the end of it, it had snowballed like most of the things when it comes to boxing in my life. And instead of me just having a show, I put on an all-female show showcasing the best of amateur boxing in London. And I worked with Terry Kelly, who's a really amazing, prominent figure in female boxing in this country. And I also decided, as a result of my own journey, coming out of an abusive situation, for a long time, I didn't understand necessarily what I was experiencing was abuse. I mean, there were some physical, very obvious signs, but when it comes to emotional abuse, when it comes to coercion, there's an element where you question yourself, where you really feel like you're imagining things. It must be you. You're contributing to this. I'm also a confident, outspoken person, so often it doesn't make sense to yourself, or if you say it out loud to people, oh, you're a boxer, you're so confident, how could you let somebody talk to you in a certain way, or how can you let someone put their hands on you? It doesn't give you safety to share what's real or honest. So actually you just try and manage it yourself. My own relationship during that time, it was confusing because it feels like the moments, that are challenging are just those moments, but eventually over time they start to accumulate. And I think when you're in a relationship that you think is healthy, what I have learned is, how does it work when there's conflict? And when does it start feeling unsafe? And when can you start to say that it doesn't feel safe? And how does the person respond? I think these are powerful indications that what you're experiencing is not healthy. And so we often feel like we don't have the space to say, this is not okay, and hope that the person can receive it with care and love and want to resolve it. And so that's where it gets confusing. And then throw in the fact that you have children with a person who you feel is not offering that safety, it just embeds and entangles you further into that. For me anyway, it felt like I had a huge responsibility of keeping this family unit together. At what cost? It's normal and natural to want to have your family together. And I think we also have to question, what is that signaling in terms of to your children? The messaging, the subliminals, the energetic context. These are all things that accumulate and eventually grow to impact children as adults who then repeat behaviors and make decisions that impact them again and over again. So I think, at what point are you able to say or identify that this is not okay? And it took me a very long time. And it wasn't until I was able to talk to other women about their own experiences that I understood, oh, this is not healthy, this is not okay. But it takes time, and it's a process for sure. There's a lot of suppressed feelings when it comes to things like that. So I really felt a turning point in my journey was going to the Women's Trust, which is where they had group therapy sessions where I got to hear other women's stories. So what it did was create a safe space, first of all, for me to share my own, not feel judged. And it also gave me validation, because I was able to understand that, okay, what I was going through or how I was experiencing it was in fact what it was. And so because of that journey, I digress a little bit, but because of that experience with the Women's Trust, I wanted to raise money and give back. And then it got me thinking about my own experience further and the things that I didn't receive in terms of my own healing journey. So as amazing as a lot of these services are for women who have suffered from abuse, there's a point after you get initial care, there's this no man's land of where you're okay. However, you're still healing, you're still experiencing trauma, you're still going through your own challenges, and there's no space for that to go, because everybody's dealing with the initial crisis or the support out of the relationship. But often, and as I've learned through this process, a lot of women need support after they've come out of the relationship further down the line. That's when their mental health really starts to suffer. That's when they're finding it hard in terms of solo parenting, having access to resources and tools to not only move out of their situation, but into a place of growth and healing. So my journey into the ring was all tied up with my own experience, and then wanting to, I guess, break out and evolve from that and share that process with others. So here I am, this 12-week program, going through this boxing experience. It's May 13th and I turn 40 on May 15th. And so my journey was just about stepping into the ring. Of course, I really wanted to win. And of course, I started to engage all the tools that I knew were available to me and that I'd been using in my boxing days, but had separation from because of the experiences that I'd put myself through. So boxing and this process really helped me connect again with who I was, what I'm capable of, and that I can do anything, essentially. My body was different, completely different. And on top of that, I was putting on a whole event, and I decided to start a social enterprise, which was Fight Forward. I am really excited and proud to say we just had our first event where I took 10 women on a similar journey to the one that I'd experienced, where they trained for 12 weeks. They've never stepped into a boxing ring before. And some of them have experienced abuse and they're further along their journey. And this process was really about the journey and the healing and the connection and the safety to share their experiences and ultimately step in the ring at the end of it and show up for themselves. I feel emotional about it because I understand what it takes. I understand what it takes for you to show up for yourself, especially at times when it's hard, when you don't feel that you can, when people tell you you can't. And so it feels powerful to be able to show people that you can. And I only want to embody that. I am not someone who is fully healed and coming from a space of, just get up and get on with things. I'm living this experience and I'm sharing it in real time, and the messiness of it and the honesty of it. And I think that's what I want to share with others, that it's real and you can, and it's a process, but we don't give up. We get up, we find another way, we're resilient, we can ask for help, we have tools. And that's the most important thing, is to understand that we have tools. My why for Fight Forward is championing women through triumph over trauma. We don't just have to survive, we can thrive. This is about connecting other women with other women who have been through something challenging and are able to share their stories with safety, with care, with love, and with inspiration. And I'm interested in showing my daughters, most importantly, that we don't have to accept, we don't have to stay in one place if we're not happy, and that at any time, whether it's a relationship or a situation or career or work, at any time we have tools to change. That's most important. So this is Fight Forward, the podcast, 6 episodes. This is season 1. We have Kieran Gandhi, Natasha Jonas, Emma Marshall, Sue Anstis, and the one and only Coach Cam. We're going to talk about trauma. We're going to talk about healing. We're going to talk about emotion, vibes, boxing, movement, everything in between. So stay tuned and follow us on this journey for Fight Forward, triumph over trauma.